right. So up next, we've got Steve Turner and Ben Tyminski, both from Prudential, both with lots and lots of security experience and working in architecture capacities at Prudential. I think we're all interested because it's XDR, not EDR. So let us know your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear it. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Justin, for introducing us. So, as Justin mentioned, I'm Steve and Ben is on here as well, both here from Prudential, from the security architecture team. Today, we're going to talk to you about XDR and how you can make it successful within your organization and what it is and isn't. So hopping in here real quick. So again, I'm Steve Turner, work at Prudential doing security architecture, whole boatload of experience across a ton of different technology stacks, and pretty active on Twitter in a non-controversial capacity.
Hi guys, I'm Ben Tyminski. I'm a security architect at Prudential with over 4 years of experience in the cybersecurity world.
Hopping right in, XDR, what is it? So just to base, get a level set, for everybody. XDR stands for Extended Detection and Response. So what does that mean to you? Basically, think about all the various tools that you've implemented throughout the years, whether that be traditional AV, EDR, DLP, stuff within your network security stack for network detection and response, and kind of slam it all together. And then slam all of that together, make it talk to each other, allow that data between all of those different things to be correlated and analyzed, and allow it to spit out, alerts or detections kind of across those various stacks. XDR fits into the model that we've all heard, the buzzword bingo of zero trust and kind of that concept of assuming compromise, right? So, XDR is very focused on, instead of you choosing your best of breed kind of across the board, going with, either one vendor, one technology solution stack, and allowing all of those various tools to talk to each other and provide you with significantly more analysis and intelligence between tool sets. So, once you kind of decide that you want to overhaul your security stack and kind of look at what XDR has to offer, we have to talk about why you even are considering it. So I'm sure a lot of these things that I have here on the slide resonate with a lot of the audience. You probably have a ton of legacy security tools that you've implemented throughout the years for one reason or another, whether it was to meet some audit finding that you had, meet some technology gap that you had from either an external or internal assessment that you had. You're hopping around to different consoles to go and respond to different things. You've got multiple sensors and vendors kind of across the various technology stacks. You're either doing manual correlation with your SIM today, or you have no correlation or integration between those various systems. And then my favorite part, that a lot of people don't really talk about, in public, is I'm sure a lot of us have configurations that we've put in place, when these various solutions were implemented, and it hasn't been touched since. So, as a security professional, that's something that you just kind of start screaming about, and you're like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. And then going hand in hand with that, as those tools were implemented, you never went back and kind of said, with the other technology teams, are we impacting what you're doing, or, are we causing like issues throughout the environment? Are these tools stepping on each other and messing up the telemetry that we're getting back, that we're trying to correlate against? And, did we even bother talking to some of these other business or technology teams throughout the organization to get their input on whether these tools make sense, or, if that was the right thing to implement? So that being said, I'm going to bump it over to Ben to kind of talk about, the implementation experience that we ran through, things to watch out for, and just overall kind of talk to a lot of the things that you have to watch out for from an XDR front.
Thanks, Steve. So to start off with, I know this sounds super obvious, but a lot of people don't even bother with this step, and that is mapping out your existing security framework. And if you do have it mapped out, it's probably not updated or you haven't looked at it in a very long time. So the things you want to ask yourself when you're mapping out these frameworks is, why did you buy this tool, right? What gap does it fill in your enterprise? And then can this tool's functionality be moved into an XDR platform that's currently out? Remember that you want to be able to move your security posture forward. So if that's adding in functionalities such as like cloud posture management, threat and vulnerability manager, or even web content filtering, map it out into your matrix to understand where your gaps are and the must-haves when you're moving to an XDR solution. Next slide. So when you're replacing your entirety stack, right, your security stack, it's pretty hard. It's going to be a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of adjustments that are going to be made, right? And there's a lot of stuff to look at and documentation for XDR. So you want to rely on divvying up the work between groups. That means integrating in your SOC, your investigation teams, and even maybe your client engineering teams that work on the OS at that level. You want to review the solutions together to make sure that everyone is on the same page and that it's going to be a good choice for your organization. It also helps the teams that are potentially going to be using the platform to get their hands on it sooner and make them more comfortable and understand how the platform is going to start correlating the data across the enterprise. When you're doing this, it's probably a great practice to use a security task management tool. It'll make things clear so people know that are in the project, they understand what is currently being done and what is going to need to be done in the process, and understand what kind of tasks they're going to be dealt with throughout the project. Next slide. So when you're doing the POCing and testing, this is probably the most daunting task there is, because it's going to be very data heavy. And this is where you're going to want to record all this data, because it makes or breaks what kind of XDR solution you go to and what vendor you choose. This is when your rating matrix really becomes like a live feed. You always want to be going back to the matrix to make sure it's updated and it's correctly pointing to which vendors have a gap or a hard issue that you can't move forward with. Right? So that's when you start documenting all your new discoveries, and you would even go back when you're finishing up testing scripts. Every single time you should go back. You shouldn't say you'll update it later, because since this has so many moving parts, you're probably going to forget about it, and it would probably impact you when selecting a vendor. The documentation is key, right? Even down to the small things that you may think is not a big deal. In the end, it could come back to bite you when you're doing a deployment, because something can happen out in the environment and you may have seen it but not documented it during the testing or the POC. So it's always recommended to document unexpected outcomes, test policies, and what environments you're putting them in and what settings you're putting across the domains. And also, of course, the biggest thing, right, is the showstoppers that will stop you from moving forward into an XDR platform. Here too, you still want to include the SOC, the investigations teams, and then you also want to start building upon bringing in business analysts and business users to start testing this out. A lot of the testing is going to be overlapped a little bit, but each of these teams are going to have a particular thing they want to test, and they're going to be the experts on testing it. And also the business, right? They have processes that you may not understand or know about that will need to be tested. And if issues come up, they can be able to be resolved before you even do a deployment in your environment. One of the things with XDR, since it is a growing platform, is you always want to go back to your vendor's documentation during the testing and the POC, because you may have to go back and retest if they're updating their documentation and sending out new features. We recommend setting up notifications for these documents so you don't have to go in every single day, and you may forget. And then you also want to make sure that the testing matches up to the new features that are being sent out or being updated in the platform. The testing sample of machines that you should use is obviously more just than new machines. You want to use the new machines to ensure that the testing goes smoothly, but you also want to start bringing in machines in your QA environment that have been out there for a while. This being said, it's because you want to use something that's out there for a little bit, that's received security updates, has been on the network for a while, and people have been logging in and out of. It will kind of show you how the platform will interact with something instead of just building a new machine. But the new machines too are helpful because you know they're in good health and you know you can go through a smooth test script without having any environmental impacts. When you're redoing a test, you always want to re-image your machines and start fresh. You want to make sure that those machines, like I said, are in good health, and you start ahead of the game instead of trying to work with something that could potentially be broken. And when you're testing in the cloud environment, make sure that you're not in production and you're sandboxing this environment, because it's easy to reformat and repeat the testing quickly, but also because you're still learning the platform. So the settings that you're putting out to test may not be 100% what you want to put out in production, and you can cause a gap, and that's the last thing you want to do in your cloud environment. Lastly, you would want to keep up with the vendor. You want to make sure that you go back to them with potential feature enhancements and things like that that aren't working for you or that are working for you, because you can just ask them to see if they're going to potentially make an enhancement to this feature, and the worst thing they say is no. But this is a sneak peek into how they're going to be supporting their products in the future if you do choose to go to them. Next slide. So after you've done all this POC and testing, you don't want to waste that time just moving your legacy policies over, whether it's from the AV policies and the EDR policies, and even the custom detections. You want to start fresh and build upon them, because there's going to be new settings that you may want to add in, and you may want to test early on in a first to go deployment to really get a good stance of how it's going to interact in a production environment. You just don't want to bring something over because, like Steve said before, it's been there for a very long time. This is the way the company's done it. It's just really not a good practice. And also because XDR is a cross-domain solution. So you need to consider what you want to detect and how you want to alert upon it in the domains and in your enterprise. One of the things that we did a lot was triple check the settings and policies for accuracy to make sure they're going to fit within our organization and make sure it fits into our structure of our architect diagrams and things like that. Because there's nothing like accidentally deploying something to the production environment and missing a step or creating a gap, right? So one of the things we did is set up a compliance check that would audit all these settings, maybe monthly or weekly, to understand if things are getting changed by users or different groups and things like that, and to keep them into like a compliance check to ensure that everything's running smoothly. And one of the most important things when you go to do the deployment is making sure your help desk is actually involved in it and they understand what's about to happen in the environment. You can never tell what's going to happen in a production rollout. It could go extremely well and smooth, or it could go and take a turn for the worse. So if they are ready, if they're ready to be able to action things and route the incidents to the correct teams, a lot of the deployment can be saved and smoothed out over time. Next slide. So this is the slide I really call like the I made an oop, because you have your blinders on from the beginning, right? You want to get through your POC, you want to select a vendor or an XDR platform, and you want to just get through the deployment and make the security in your enterprise a better thing. But there's also things that you need to be aware of even through going through the deployment. The POCs that you do and the testing scripts and the first to go groups that you have probably aren't going to catch every single thing that you're going to see during deployment and even after the deployment. And so having basic troubleshooting steps and reports daily are going to kind of improve your stance on this. And one of the examples that I'm talking about is false positive alerting. Each of the vendors are going to say that XDR will reduce false positive alerts in your enterprise. And that is true, but after a very long baselining period, and that really depends on your deployment. So if you're doing a slow deployment, that means the users and the functions are being deployed slowly out there, right? So that means it's still learning and mapping out your enterprise and still trying to understand what kind of emails come in and what kind of users are doing and things like that. So you have to understand from the vendor what their baseline period is and work and utilize your internal teams and resources to understand the false positives that are bad from the good. Also, a tip would be to stop using PSExec and move some of your packages to just be code signed. It will reduce a lot of your informational false positives from the start. And when you're evaluating your XDR solution, you really need to think about your cloud in depth and start thinking about whether you want to be inline or an API integration. And that really just points back to your architecture standards and your organization standards. There's really no other thing to do but to just dig down and think about that in the early stages. Next slide. So when we talk about evolving the processes, it really points back to the SOC, because the SOC's concepts and alerts may change drastically based on their correlation logic with your XDR platform. So they have to be ready on things to be changed and how they're being viewed in the enterprise and in what order they're being viewed at and what the level of alerting can be when everything becomes activated. A lot of the alerts they're going to see, if they don't already have it set up, are not going to be something you've seen before in the previous legacy tools or even the next gen tools that you have, because now you're connecting all your domains into one platform and the data correlation is going to become stronger and it's going to hit on different things. So you may see an alert for email and watch that travel all the way down to the endpoint and back, right? It's going to really show you a platform and see where everything's going forward from. So you want to ensure that the new features that you're using are operationalized and that are running smoothly. You want to check with the users on platform that they're not having any pain points or issues with it. And you just don't want to accept when they come to you and say, we're slammed in this new platform and we need to keep on doing this way. And that was the old way of using your legacy tools. You want to make sure they're involving their processes and going through those growing pains. Since XDR is growing, the new features are going to give you a chance to take some of the ownership of different processes and bring them back into the CSOC as they now have the functionality in the platform to really see a holistic view into your enterprise. Next slide. So here's the list of what me and Steve thought would be like a great takeaway or a great list of things that you need to do while you're deploying and after your deployment, if you choose to do an XDR solution. You want to make sure that your documentation and your verbiage for all your security standards include the XDR platform and where it's being used and exactly how it's being used. There's nothing like going to an audit and everything points back to your legacy solutions. I'm sure that would be a great time and a very long audit, and that would be painful. And for a security architect, the job just doesn't stop after you deploy. You just don't wipe your hands clean, because since it's in XDR is in a growing stage, new features are going to be released quarterly, if not even more, and even adjustments to the features they currently have. So you always want to ensure that you're talking with the vendor, getting their roadmaps and keeping up to date with the ideas and functionalities they want to release, and even start talking to them about things you want to see released in your organization. Right? Because they can eventually build that into their roadmap and you can kind of get an idea of where they're going to be going for the next couple of quarters or years. The next thing I can't stress enough is that surround your XDR solution with a positive culture. And what I mean by that is keeping your teams in a learning mode. You want to maybe do some lunch and learns, have some meetings where they can really talk and have an open conversation about the usage of the platform. So you can understand if they have pain points or if they're using a functionality, like I said before, that you can bring back to the vendor as an enhancement. You want to make sure that they're using it and they're happy and that everything's working as is, or you need to go back to make adjustments. And one of those things that you can make an adjustment to is automating as much as possible. And I know that sounds like just a generic thing and it's easier said than done kind of deal. But this, if you automate as much as you possibly can, the CSOC and the investigations teams will have more time to investigate the higher alerts and things like that that are more important to their organization, instead of manually closing out things that could be, like I said, false positives or low level alerts that really don't pose a threat to an environment. So you would want to start out with some easy wins like AV remediation and then quarantining of the low level alerts. And then from there, moving on to your playbook and working across the domains to execute on those alerts and auto closing. All that's going to save a serious amount of time that could be now taken into something like threat hunting. The threat hunting custom detections that if you did have an EDR solution probably won't carry over exactly to the new XDR platform unless you're staying with the same vendor. So you need to think about what these custom detections are going to look like when you're adding email, identity, and web content to them. They're most likely going to be more robust, and you're going to have to see exactly what they're going to look like when they alert and fine tune them throughout it. And this is something you probably want to start in the early stages way before deployment. Next slide. So this screenshot is just a high level of how we mapped out some of our existing tools and also the vendors that we looked at. So when we were going through a POC, we filled this out. Then we had to break it down even further to really see what they did actually links back to what the organization needs and wants. And also a lot of it, you know, vendors will say, oh, we can do this, this, and this. Or we can do identity, we can do web content filtering, and we can do a solo firewall. But does it fit in how you want to use it and how the organization wants to have it used? Next slide. And that is our presentation. I thank you guys for listening. This was my first SANS talk, so it was extremely nerve-wracking, but also a fun thing to do.